Okay, good. Thanks.
Aha.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, for the last session. So I'd like to welcome you to Green Working Group. And the note well you've probably seen a few times already. Just to remind you that everything you say and do in this meeting is a contribution to the IETF process, and you should have read the note well and be aware of what the impact of the meaning of that is. And the note really well is that we would like everyone here to be respectful in terms of how they interact in the meeting in person, with each other, and also on the mailing list as well. So we think it's worth remembering that we're all collectively trying to make the internet a better place. And our agenda today. So our plan is to split the session. We've got two sessions. We've got one today for an hour and a half, and then we've got one on Thursday, the last session for an hour. And this session, we're going to focus on the sort of foundations. So use cases in terminology and architectural components. And then in the second session, we're going to focus on the models. Because of conflict, we're going to sort of jiggle the use cases and presentations around the other way than the way they're listed on this agenda. Right, so liaison status, do you want to speak to this? Is that?
Well, as you know, we agreed to have what I have called a Hello World liaison, just telling the rest of the world groups that are engaging in energy matters that we have started our activity. We prepared and agreed a text that has not been submitted yet, basically because, well, there were some subtleties related to the who to address, the format to use, and things like that. And things, frankly, this was not of the highest priority. It has been delayed, but it will be sent during this week. And those of you who are participating in other groups will receive probably some questions from your participants. The point is that is important that once we send this hello world, we very likely will receive replies, and we have to answer and enter into some interaction. And the point is, we will have to decide, and this is something that I believe is important, that we have to decide whether we want just to limit it to this kind of collaboration by exchanging liaison statements from one time to another, or this is what is some kind of epistolary relationship, or we want to have something more in-depth in some cases. And in particular, yesterday we met a representative from the W3C that are interested in coordinating regarding in particular, they have seen that some use cases where there was some overlap and that there is a commitment among both organizations to avoid overlaps, and they wanted to align this. This is something that we will keep you informed how it evolves, as an example of something that goes beyond epistolary collaboration.
And then the other thing I want to cover is, so we spoke to a liaison from W3C yesterday. So they raised the fact that there's the W3C Sustainable Web Interest Group overlaps with some of the work that we're doing here, certainly in the use cases that we are considering effectively. I don't think there's any concerns in terms of that overlap, just an awareness that that overlap exists. And we pointed out that we're sort of operating at different levels and different layers of the stack, so we shouldn't have too many issues. We expect to sort of speak to W3C, to that particular group, and to make sure that we're sharing awareness of what we're doing here and also what they are doing. There's potentially an opportunity for somebody here to participate in that W3C group, and that's a good way to try and make sure we're all in step. So if that's something that's of interest to anyone here, then please can you let either Diego or I know, and then we can speak to W3C. So we have had, over the last sort of cycle since IETF 121, we've had one document that we've, on the use cases that we put up for adoption after the interim meeting we had. That was, in the interim meeting, we spent a lot of time going through the different use cases, and we had good feedback on terms of which use cases were felt to be, should be included or not, and what sort of should be cleared up. In the adoption poll itself and the call, there wasn't much feedback on the list, and that's actually been a general thing, that we need more feedback coming on the list and more reviews. There was one particular feedback, strong opposition from one person who felt the document wasn't ready to be adopted and needed more discussion, and there's an element of that that's fair. But it is worth noting that both the chairs and ADs do not see this use case document as something that should go to RFC. It's meant to be a document that we'll hold as a living document within the working group to try and concentrate, focus energies to make sure we're all understanding the use cases we're addressing, but we don't need to necessarily take it any further than that. So it's to help the actual work documents that we're producing. So the adoption call was effectively postponed. We decided not to adopt at this stage. We expect there to be at least one more round of updating the language and improve the documents first, and some more discussion, and then hopefully we'll adopt it before the next meeting is our current plans. Just a reminder on how we structure our work. So we're focusing on different parts here. The use case and requirements, there's discussion on that, and we don't expect either of those to go to RFC. And the aim there is to focus on common understanding, to make sure we're on the same page, and to make sure the solutions we are developing do address the requirements and the use cases that we think are necessary. So we don't see any need for formal requirements here. We don't think that will be necessary. We think the use cases should probably be sufficient. But we're happy to hear other people's views on that one. Then we'll focus on the foundations, which is terminology and metrics, to try and get common understanding there. And then, like the session tomorrow, we'll focus on modeling proposals. And our view is all we would like to see is like a common, simple, extensible model as a base, and then the ability to extend that with additional things as necessary. And then finally, from how this work progresses, we would quite like this work to happen somewhat in parallel. We don't want to have a long session of doing use cases and then terminology and then the modeling. We think these things can go in parallel. And at various points through the stage, we might take things to working group last call to check on consensus on those documents, but delay publishing them until later date. So we feel that, the terminology and metrics, we may get to the point where we can do a working group last call once it's been adopted and progressed on that document, but hold off publishing until the other ones are more complete. And then we can either take them as a set or start sending them to the ISG, which we're going to call Agile Waterfall. And then finally, some plans on the coming period. So we want to build consensus on the use case and terminology. We want to get that document adopted into the working group. We want to be making progress with that. We also want to, the terminology is also another area. We want to get that document going so we can build on it. We want to start looking at the common data model. So we would like the working group to consider the drafts here and see if we can work towards finding some common ground there. And there's different ways that can be achieved. So either the authors of those different drafts agree to come together and find a common draft, or perhaps we can do a design team, or we can do a poll, that sort of thing, but we want to try and make progress with that. We are planning to be a bit more proactive with virtual interims over the next session, so apologies, we got one arranged last time. I did say we'd do some others. Other factors got in the way of those. One thing in terms of virtual interims that Diego discussed is the timing of them in terms of what time zone. And there's been some discussion on lists as to whether it'd be more effective to do them spread at different time zones around the world, or to focus on one. Diego and I have a preference to sort of picking one time zone slot that's common, and then have maybe an interim meeting once a month to try and make progress with these topics and progress the work. So, but again, I know other people feel differently about this, so we might do a quick poll to check on what the working group's opinion on that is, or show of hands. So I will just type that out. So I'm going to say, do you want the virtual interims to be to be at the same time zone? Should be in the same. So that poll can be going. So vote yes on this if you're happy for the virtual interims to all be at the same time zone. I propose something like 2 to 4 p.m. UTC. We would move that maybe forward or back an hour, depending. Vote no if you prefer us to try and arrange interim meetings spread at like 8 hours apart. So plus or minus 8 hours from something like that. And while you're voting for that, at the same time, I would like to stress we need to make more progress on the list. So we would like to have more discussion on the drafts, and we would like to have more interaction, and it felt like it's been quite quiet. So certainly as we start adopting the work and discussing use cases and terminology, I think we can make more progress and quicker progress. So we're hoping to do more activity and reviews on the list. And then finally, obviously, Diego and I are both in Bangkok this week. So if there is anything you want to chat to us, then come and find us or email the chairs. So looking at the poll, it looks like my reading is that people are either happy for it to be at a common time or there's a few that have no opinions. There's a couple of people who oppose that maybe it's not quite so convenient, but I still think on balance that will make the most progress. And then we can see later how that goes ahead. Any other agenda bashing? I know we're going to move your presentation further forward, but other than that, anything else?
No, I'm taking note of this.
Okay, so
sorry,
yourself, Mesh.
I put myself in the queue. I wanted to just briefly touch on the adoption call for the use cases document. Wanted to get clarity on whether the decision to postpone was because of one objection from one person, or was it the fact that you didn't get enough support for the document?
It is more because the discussion was very limited, and there was a strong objection and some comments about the format and how to improve it. So it seemed that it was a little bit too soon to declare the approach adopted. More because of the approach, not because I believe that there was a consensus, a general consensus that having a document on use cases was a good idea. But our impression was the number of direct support was limited, and we wanted to have an opportunity of refining it a little bit.
Right. I think that's important distinction to have.
No, sure.
Is that we almost seem to agree that we need use cases, and therefore a document that is adopted that will work on those use cases is important, and really no reason to try to
No. This and the objection. I mean, we tried to address the objection and try to clarify why we were going for such an adoption.
Hi, I'm Carlos Bernardos, and for those that wondered, there is a typo on the first slide. This is not cats, this is green. But next slide should be fine. And I already sent the slides to the chairs for correction. Thanks. So I'm presenting this on behalf of my co-authors, Alain Murad and Mohammad Yatoun. And this is about a proposed use case on ISAC. ISAC stands for Integrated Sensing and Communications. And it's something that is getting a lot of attention in the recent days from some standardization and also from research. And the idea is that it enables to reduce infrastructure for communications, either simultaneously or at equal times, to also perform environmental sensing, meaning that with that infrastructure, we are capable of sense if there is an object, if the object is moving, and even things more detailed, like, for example, people and even emotions of people to a certain extent, depending on the actual sensing technology. In this use case that in the draft is also documented a bit or summarized, and you have a picture there, you may have multiple network nodes that are participating in a sensing task, and those may be collecting and processing data either locally or in a different node with more computing capabilities. And of course, this involves certain amount of energy consumption that could be monitored and modified to meet some requirements in terms of energy consumption. I think it's also worth mentioning that in the ETSI, there is an ISAC ISG industry specification group also working on that. And one of the work items of that that group is to also look into use cases, as well as the 3GPP has also initiated some efforts and analyzed some use cases on ISAC. Before I go into in more details on the ISAC use case, I just wanted to also highlight that in the draft documenting this use case, I follow a template that we propose also to be used for all the use cases in this group. Very simple template based on something that we also did in the raw.NET working group while defining the use cases of raw. It's 3 parts: description of the use case, general description, then a bit going into the specifics why this is relevant for green, like if a use case involves components that are able to report on energy consumption and be able to be reconfigured based on energy consumption, for example. And then requirements. I know that there are some discussion and the chairs may not want to go into requirements. I personally think it's good to have requirements in the use cases because that motivates why a use case is documented or not. It's a way of also having some kind of justification why this is considered a relevant use case for green. But regardless of that, whatever the working group decides, that could be removed or not if the working group at the end agrees on having some kind of template for the requirements, and we can, if requirements are not agreed to be something key, we can maybe lower or lighten up a bit how these requirements are specified or described in the document. Then if I go into the actual ISAC use case that we describe, it's a specific ISAC use case. There may be others, but just to simplify why this could be potentially relevant for green, is energy-aware smart city traffic management. So the idea is that ISAC systems could be deployed in a smart city to be able to monitor and optimize the actual vehicles traffic while minimizing the overall energy of the communication network and the support of the network to do this traffic monitoring and optimization. The system may integrate not only ISAC, but also other technologies of sensing like radars and LiDARs. And all these different sensors could be used to detect vehicle density, monitor road conditions, and communicate with the vehicles and with infrastructure in the network, in the vehicle network, let's say, to improve the traffic paths and also to improve the energy consumption, or doing that by improving the energy consumption, optimizing the energy consumption of the whole system. The ISAC, using ISAC will actually already help into the reduction of energy consumption by using or by avoiding to install additional specific sensing devices and reducing the network connectivity infrastructure. Some green specifics. In this use case, we need to be able to monitor energy consumption. Each component involved in the sensing, either roadside units or infrastructure on the road, or sensors at vehicles or at mobile devices on the people going into the vehicles, should be able to report energy consumption in real time to some kind of centralized or distributed infrastructure. And that will allow to do some reconfiguration, as mentioned later, of the system, so we can reconfigure the sensing capabilities based on the energy consumptions and requirements to meet some overall goals. So we need to be able to perform this reconfiguration for energy efficiency. We should be able to switch between high resolution or low resolution sensing, for example, and also the actual traffic on the transport used to convey or to forward the sensing data, the sensing traffic should be able to be configured in different ways to improve energy consumption. We should also be able to integrate local and global energy goals, so by enabling local configurations or configuration policies, like, for example, switching on and off some devices, while also being able to enable global coordination to achieve similar goals on a more global scale. And then that's probably too detailed for this discussion, so I will not go into the details, but the draft will also, the draft also includes some specific requirements for green in terms of the measurement granularity. You should be able to measure on per component and per network or per operation basis to be able to measure the impact of different configurations in the actual energy consumption. We should be able to switch off and off or put in sleep or standby mode different components, as well as reconfigured components at the network to also perform sensing with different levels of accuracy, and also to improve the network to be optimized in terms of energy consumption required for this sensing data traffic to be transported. And then global coordination as well, and of course, being interoperable or supporting other energy-aware standards and protocols. More details are in the draft. And then finally, some discussion. Why I'm presenting this? Well, I'm presenting this because I think this is a use case that is valid for green, that has an angle that is specific to ISAC and things that maybe are not covered from other use cases that are currently specified or discussed in this draft. I took that draft because that was the one that was considered for adoption. But basically in the working group, I didn't see any discussion on something similar to this. And my proposal will be to consider this use case for being documented in whatever document the working group finally agrees to do, and potentially taking some text from that. And as a parallel thing, also to use a template, and this is my proposal, but any other proposal will be fine, to describe all the use cases and if we want to do it at the end, associated requirements in a kind of homogeneous way. And that's it. Thanks. Yeah, sure.
No, then this is not just my opinion as a part of the group. Most of what I have seen there as requirements are more requirements not for the green protocols, it's for the application of green. So I would not say that this is against, I'm against having this, but I would not call them requirements in a green document because it should look like we are requiring that Greens is going to support global coordination. The global coordination is part of something that has to be done, whoever is using green. Mm-hmm. So I'm fine, but probably I would not call them requirements. I would call them application scenarios or applicability or something like that, because it has to do with that more than to the requirements for the. Talking with Rob yesterday, our agreement, if I remember well, was that the requirements are the requirements for green are in the charter. And these are requirements for whoever is going to use green, I would say. So we would like to see that clearly stated in the document.
On that, of course, we can write on, or we can work on doing an update that captures better that point, and I agree with you. But there are others that I think could be considered as requirements for green. And then on the requirements discussion, I thought that the charter already had like documenting requirements as an item, but if I mean, regardless of whether it says or not, we can agree on not doing it. And I will be fine, although my personal preference is I think that in order to decide what use cases are documented or not, we should have a decision point or criteria. And to me, having requirements that motivate the work on green is a good one, but just personal opinion. Thanks.
Gary.
Jari Arko, ISAC enthusiast, and working for Ericsson. So I think this is interesting, and I think it's a good case to bring forward for this working group, particularly because it's kind of not super trivial actually, but that complexity brings some issues as well, and I think the way that you described it in the draft is kind of like simplified, that you have this ISAC devices and then there's a reason for their existence, and then you sort of trade off power usage to what is actually needed. But I think it's a bit more complicated than that. Primarily, the issue is that there needs to be like somebody who has a need, and that somebody needs to define when do you actually need sensing, and for what reasons and for what granularity and delay and all kinds of parameters like that. So I think this is not just like a energy versus, what the boxes are doing for a static application, but it's, it should probably be controlled to a large extent by the application, in this case, the city, but there's other applications of ISAC. You might have a situation where you have 7 different applications using the same thing, and you have to sort of fit them into the same infrastructure and then trade off, who does what. And there's significant interest in sort of reducing the environmental and other costs of ISAC, because you do end up using power if you do a radar type operation on base stations, for instance. But also you use other important resources like spectrum that you could use for communication. And you have like this, I have limited resources and I use them for communication or for sensing, and who has the most priorities. This is a critical application. So there's tons of complicated things. So I think it's a good case because it's complicated and sort of highlights that it's, it's not super trivial, but certainly you can collect information about the power usage. But even that is a little bit like you have to, it's not like one box is consuming energy, but you have like one task, and then there's like 3 base stations contributing to that one function, and you have to put things together, and there's a processing element. And so, yeah. Anyway.
I couldn't agree more with you. So thanks for the comments. Yeah, I agree that it's more complex than just like switching off and on a light, a bulb or something like that. There are many things. There are distributed elements. There are potential multiple users of ISAC, not only the smart city. So I fully agree with that. My point is that I think that is a use case worth being added, and then we should work on the details from the green point of view. But yeah, I fully agree with what you said.
Ali Rezaki. Hi, thanks Carlos for presenting this use case. I just want to make this distinction, as Diego was also mentioning. This use case is rather oriented towards a handprint perspective, that with ISAC you will have the traffic management run more smoothly, you will save energy in traffic or in monitoring. And I thought the charter of green was more on the footprint, that we want to characterize in a standardized way what the impact of the network is. So we work on this use case ourselves in my organization as well, but does it belong in this? I'm not sure. So that's the distinction. And I wanted to make this point because I'm worried that we shouldn't arrive at a point where we are maybe implying implicitly that, oh, we have this nice handprint impact, so we can do away with certain energy consumption that we are increasing because of this or that, because of augmenting power in the radio network, because of ISAC, etc. So we shouldn't fall into that trap. Footprint and handprint should be managed completely separately.
Okay, thanks for the comments. I think I use the kind of final application example of ISAC as a way of maybe making it easier to understand what ISAC is. But in general, I'm going back to the Jari's comment. I see ISAC as a potential service that future mobile networks will offer, sensing. And that will be part of, regardless of the potential application that may be using that will be a feature like transferring data or locating a user. Those are potential services that the network provide. I see sensing as another one. So I think in that sense, it's useful to consider that in green as well.
Absolutely. Sensing is a great feature we all will want to use.
Yeah, but I mean that there is relevant for green in that sense, trying to understand how the network could have an impact, the way the network is designed on the energy consumption, for example, and the implications of the ISAC, because ISAC brings things new compared to just the traditional connectivity service of networks.
Sorry, just considering the time, can we move on to the next question, please?
It's up to you as chairs.
Let
to
me, no, but
decide on
let,
that.
let me note that this is precisely the kind of discussion that in written on the list would be lovely.
Yes, I agree, I agree.
Who's the next one? Oh, no, Ali was in the last one. Yeah, okay, so.
So I was going to poll for questions on this, but I think given the time, we'll move on and take this to the list in terms of having further discussion and working out whether or not this is within the Green Charter and also whether we want to include this in the use cases. So Luis, you're up.
Hello, everyone. This is Luis from Telefonica. I will present the draft on use cases for energy efficiency management on behalf of my co-authors, Emil, Marisol, Benoit, and Chin. So, well, basically, I think that from the previous discussion and the chair's slides, also more or less is clear the point where we are. But essentially, the history of this document is as follows. We produce an initial document, and that document, the scope of it was essentially to cover use cases. We cover 11 use cases so far. We also added the requirements that were coming from the use cases described in the document, but also from the previous work in the EMAN working group. And also we added an initial overview of a framework, being this framework considered for collection, computation, and aggregation of metrics. After the interim that we had in December, the decision was to narrow down the scope of the document, so just simply concentrating on the use cases, and then we produce a new version. As said, this version concentrates simply on the use cases, so we have a list of use cases and no more than that. We also added, or we kept the framework as an appendix, just for reference. And this was the document that entered in the adoption poll. As already commented, the chairs decided to postpone this adoption for having more discussion, basically. The use cases that we listed, there are use cases of different nature. Some of them are more generic, more basically intentional on what can be done with from the green perspective. Some of them are more specific on certain situations, and probably we will need to have some way of clustering them, maybe, yeah, according to these general statements, maybe identify particular cases. This is probably some work that we have to do in the next iterations of the document. Also, probably could be necessary to have these distinction points or these particularities that could be somehow related with the green effort. By now, having removed the requirements or it was called requirements in the past, probably we lacked that view of trying to identify what could be relevant for the working group effort and not. So probably we need to come back. Well, this is a decision, a discussion that could happen later. So during the adoption process, there were different comments, but basically here I'm highlighting two of them. The comments sent by Carlos Pignataro, that essentially he claimed that it was premature to go for adoption of the draft, apart from requiring editorial cleanup, that this is evident, let's say. Carlos also highlighted some problems from his perspective. For instance, the need of considering the requirements, also the fact that the framework is in the document, but probably potentially, according to the charter, maybe the framework should be described somewhere else. And also, well, some other aspects like the consideration of energy efficiency and so on and so far. And then the comments from Carlos Bernardos that was basically focused on the template. Carlos presented the template in the presentation before, so I will not insist on that. But basically, the point there was somehow to have this, as he mentioned, these ways of justifying or identifying what could come from the use case to the work in green. So with this situation, let's say the next step that we consider would be to revisit the goals considered for this document from the perspective of the working group, so the discussion that we are having today, so to understand what could be the proper direction. Just as a reminder, there is the document is on a GitHub, so there is the opportunity of raising their issues and comment directly on top of the document, so that with the editors can basically take into account those points. And yeah, basically our idea would be to prepare well in advance a new version so that we can iterate up to the meeting in Madrid and basically consolidating an approach. And so probably this idea of having the interims will help us on doing so and being sure that we prepare a new version somehow with a common agreement for the Madrid meeting. And that was all from my side. Thank you.
Since this is a more a procedural question than anything, when you mentioned that the framework has been moved to an appendix, do you plan to make it part of another contribution?
Well, in fact, there is a use case that goes in the direction of how to leverage on the framework. So by now, somehow is supporting the description of that use case. The framework itself has value to be reported and documented. What I'm not sure, and this is my personal thing, is if this would be the document for the framework. I think that the purpose of the document is not to progress, probably not. Probably could be a matter of another document where basically can progress up
exactly,
to
exactly. That was what I had in mind. That's probably since this document is intended to be kept as a live document,
Yep.
as reference for others, and probably some content of this document would end here and there, but the framework could be the justification for the common model or something like that. It's,
It can be treated as a single piece and move to another document, yes.
Mahesh, speaking as a contributor, if I understood reading the document per the abstract, this draft was defining a grouping of use cases. Is that true?
Well, I think, again, my personal view, we need somehow to cluster the use cases. So, but for doing that, yeah, certainly we need to understand which is provided by, which uniquely is provided by each use case, okay, so that we can keep the use case as justification of the point that is unique from that, and then clustering in the sense, for instance, that generic statements, if it's for management of energy, if it's for, I don't know, switching off parts of the network, I don't know. We need somehow to cluster them, and for selecting, let's say, the final use cases, also to understand which use case, is provided by each use case that can justify to have the description of the use case there.
Okay, so for example, in section 2.3, you said reporting on life cycle management, I think is that section. And I'm just wondering whether that's really in scope of the Green Working Group.
Yeah.
And if not, then maybe sustain RTG is probably the right place to move some of that discussion. Similarly, for section 2.4, I think you had virtualized or cloud native virtual functions.
Mm-hmm.
I would like the work group to kind of debate whether that's in scope of what we are trying to do.
Yeah, thank you. So again, here, this idea maybe of that Carlos was presented before of what he called requirements in his template could help to understand what could be in scope or not, and then take the decision of what can be moved.
What it would be interesting is that we have a common format. That can be agreed and others can contribute and comment on it. We have your two, or at least two of your co-authors on the queue. Emil?
Diego, you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead. Not only me, everybody can hear you.
This is good news.
Be careful.
So, first, thank you, Luis, for presenting. To make it short, the framework is just there to ease the reading of the use cases if needed. And with regard to the next step, we have many use cases and we need to group them and then to move the long-term one outside the working group documents. And I think it's a good idea to have a template like Carlos suggests, but I don't know which one is the best, but we can adapt the one suggested by Carlos and add something about the requirements there if we need. But I think it's not a good idea at this step because we have removed the requirement to satisfy what we agreed in interim meetings. So it's bad that for the next step to add them again. We can do it later. This is my view.
You want to add anything, Luis?
No, well, basically, in some point in time, we will need to have these particularities per use case that can justify also commonalities among them. Probably what we were calling requirements will show as well what is the unique value of each use case. So sooner or later, we need to go into that point, and then with that, deciding how to reduce, let's say.
The famous KVIs. So this
Yes.
is
Yeah.
okay. Marisol.
Yes, I hope you hear me as well. Perfect. I wanted to make a note to Mahesh's comments on the use case to the three. We indeed included carbon reporting and energy mix as a parameters on the life cycle management, but it was also called out the embedded energy. And I will reiterate the question from Mahesh: should we include things related to energy on the use cases? And embedded energy brings, this life cycle on the production many times, and this is something that we could not get from the operations, right? But it can be collected from the data sheets or information that the manufacturer could include into this static information that we were linking as well many times with the inventory work that is ongoing as well. But this reporting on life cycle management, I would agree, carbon reporting, energy mix might be something that we cannot control from the manufacturing, and normally operators are not looking at the time of running the operations, but embedded energy, it is something that should we consider or not. I think this will be as well good for feedback, right? And see if we need to consider.
If it is brief, it is very brief, or okay, Emil, if you don't mind, we are going to skip because otherwise we're not going to cover it. If you have, we can talk about this in the next session or on the list, if you don't mind.
Perfect.
We have not allowed our AD to make that, so. Okay, so it's Chin, the next one, right?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Qin Wu, and I will present this terminology for energy efficiency network management. And so recap a little bit what we has already been discussed. This 0.0 version already presented in the previous W meeting, and in the previous meeting, actually, we reviewed the motivation goal and 12 core terminologies, and we already received the majority support for this 0.0 version draft, and but the base chair suggestion we originally plan, have a second interim meeting to discuss this terminology, but unfortunately this didn't happen. So currently we actually try to capture all the open issue on the GitHub. Actually, one of the issues is about the capability discovery, and this actually we will cover this in today's presentation. So why we want to do this work actually? Based on the Green Working Group Charter, one of the work item is defined term and definition related to energy efficiency metrics, and so this can break it down into common terminology and also how to characterize the various different type of metrics. So we want to cover this. So this main motivation we propose this draft, and what goal we want to achieve through this draft? We really want to, define a set of parameter which will serve as a basis, provide an umbrella for all the green related worker in the green working group. But we will not enumerate all the terminology related to the energy related part. Actually, we want to only focus on key terminology, and also we should admit actually some terminology has already been defined in existing IETF documents, so we will try to reuse this terminology. And in addition, actually, we will provide a list of the current used metrics measurement method. This metric and measurement method could be already developed by the IETF, for example, IPPM working group and some other, metric related working group could be, developed by some other SDO. So we try to cover this, in this single document. And in addition, actually, since some metric may be, captured from the other SDO, so we provide an inventory SDO. So where the relevant energy efficient effort, we can, keep track of this. And so this, we think maybe in the future version will be removed. And currently we put this, inventory SDO as an appendix to make people, better understand where this metric or method has been defined, where it has been defined. So here, this has already been presented before. If you're familiar with 12 core terminology has been defined in this draft. And so we can break it down into first existing terminology actually related to energy and power. And you can see actually this has been already, developed by the EMAN working group, which, has been formed before. And, and a key, good foundation is obviously 7326. So we try to reuse this terminology has already been developed. And also we, cover terminology like energy management, energy monitoring, and energy control. And I will not go into detail. Actually, you can see this already be specified in the existing work. And in addition, we want to cover some new terminology related to energy efficiency because we think, current trend is really looking for some energy efficiency observability, looking for the balance between the energy consumption and network throughput. So two terminology we introduced. The first is energy efficiency network management. And so the second is energy efficiency metric. So this metric is, something we can use to, measure, energy efficiency and to, so this is, two terminology we have. Actually, you can further can see actually two metric actually we have a developer to really, to cover this, energy efficiency metric. The first is energy efficiency ratio and energy efficiency. The second is power usage effectiveness. And so one reference we add is about power benchmark developed by the benchmarking working group. Actually, this really can cover how this energy efficiency ratio can be measured. And we also have power usage effective PUE, and this actually has already been used, widely deployed. And so this just give you a generic terminology for this. In addition, actually, we can break down energy efficiency into different level: network level, device level, and component level. And actually, in the draft, if you look at the appendix, you will see, where this term has been, discussed or covered. So we actually also provided a reference for this. And I want to not go into detail to cover this. And also we make some analysis for some other existing work. For example, Carlos has the green environment draft. Actually, we actually review several terms maybe related to what it already defined in this draft. For example, energy, power, and their measurement. So this has already been covered, and also energy efficiency. And I think, yeah, it's very similar. So we already cover. And but one terminology is about the energy proportionality. Actually, this is very similar to the energy efficiency or power usage, efficiency. And so this is very similar. And so So the question is whether we, use it, introduce this metric, to represent, for example, some cases like a line card consume 80% of energy used by the router. So this we can, to see whether we need to another term to cover these kind of cases. And also we have energy saving and conservation in Carlos' green environment draft, and we think, this energy saving can be seen as the effect of the implement the energy efficiency strategy. So this is something we also cover. And in addition, actually, we explore, some terminology related to the capability discovery, especially maybe related to the network inventory. So this capability, really is, help you to understand what a capability has already been supported by a network device. So you can see how you can leverage this capability to see, what kind of measure you can, connect from the network device or from the whole networker. So we can break down this capability into 3 categories: device level, component level, and also power interface setting capability has been covered. And I think, that's the end of this presentation. So we like to working to consider to adopt this work as a basis. Yeah, happy to take any comments, input for this. Thanks. Adi?
Oh, yeah.
Thanks very much indeed. It's very helpful document. This is Ali Rezaki. I just want to make a small differentiation on energy savings. You said it is equivalent to implementing energy efficiency, or it's an outcome of implementing energy efficiency. That's not the complete story. Energy saving, if I can make a rough definition, is not doing something. It's avoiding to do something, as a result of which you conserve that energy allocated to that function. Energy efficiency is doing something, the same thing with less energy. So there is a differentiation. Otherwise, like if you remove that implementing energy efficiency equates energy savings, that would solve it, I think.
Yeah, good comments. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I was just going to do a quick poll here to find out how many people have read either the latest version of the draft or any version of the draft, please. So I'll just start that poll. At the same time, if there's any other questions, now would be a good time to come up. Has my poll started? Ah, yes, wait. Okay, so we've definitely got some reviews of this draft and reading it. So I think, though, just chatting with Diego, we would like to see more reviews of this draft. So I think it'd be good to try and post it to the list and encourage discussion of some of those issues on the list.
Sure.
So we get some more reviews through, and then hopefully we can build some more energy, and then we can look at adopting. But I'd like to see more discussion first, if possible, and check. So one other thing is, so we sort of failed to get all the interims done last time, virtual interims. Is this something you would think that'd be useful to have a virtual interim on this particular one? If we try and arrange these in a kind of cadence, this could be a topic that we could try and focus on these.
Okay.
But if we do that, I think it would be good to try and get the discussion happening on the list first, and then going first, and then we can refine that.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, Jane, are you with us? You're next. Yeah. Sound is not very good.
Okay, can you hear me?
Now, yes, very good.
Okay.
You should have control of the presentation right now that is being displayed, but we're not showing it yet, right?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I thought.
Hello everyone, this is Jinwang from China Mobile. I'm here to report the draft about framework for getting ready for energy efficient networking. Next slide, please.
You should have control now, so you should be able to move the slides.
Before I present the framework, let me first say a few words about our motivation for this work. Firstly, the framework has been included in working group milestones. We need to reach a more stable version by June 2026 for Green WG to adopt. In addition, the requirements for the framework are already included in the document. The requirements of Green. Therefore, we need to propose a framework to address the requirements for a framework as mentioned in documents, the Stevens documents, and the future consensus requirements. Okay. Now I introduce the basic framework and the components. As you can see, the figure 1 shows a framework reference of a framework for green that address the basic requirements raised in the draft requirements of green WG, where there is include routers, switches. The JA is an agent for green that can collect green metrics. The energy efficient management is a function used to administer a network with a primary purpose of energy efficiency management. Is implemented inside the device or in a controller. There towards getting the green metrics includes the energy consumption of network device and so on. The following graphs how green metrics are distributed under both distributed and centralized models. The figure 2 shows an example of green metric dissemination based on distributed model. In this example, the green metrics of the device can be distributed in a distributed manner. One of the JA reports the aggregated green indicators to the energy efficiency measurement function. In figure 3, green metrics can be distributed in a centralized way. In this example, the device green metrics can be reported from JA to the energy efficiency management component in a centralized manner. That's all. Any comments and discussions?
I think we have a question from Mahesh.
Mahesh speaking as a contributor. I found the document fairly sparse. I know it's version 00, but I really didn't understand if it was ready for a presentation. I would highly encourage the authors at this point to put some meat behind the document before I think we even consider it for adoption. The second comment I had was with respect to it contains a definition of terms, and I wonder if that really belongs in the terminology document and not in this.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to respond any further, Jing? So yes, actually to echo Mahesh's comments, I also thought the document was quite light, and I think that definitely it would be worth trying to flesh out the details in more, put some more substance in there, because then it's easier to see how this framework would differentiate from a generic framework for moving this information around. So I think more details would be good there to see the benefits. I'm just going to do a poll of hands to see. I don't know if it's pretty early. So I think actually this one will take, I think we'll try and post it to the list and see if we can get more discussion and comments on this, and also consider if you can add some more details to the document.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for presenting. And then it's Jan or Marisol. Who do we know who's? I know Jan's. Let me just get the slides up, Jan.
We were asking ourselves who was going to, but this one.
So Jan, I know you've got a combined set of slides here. Present them how you want. We've got some time today that's sort of left over, so we can move this to the other part of this today, because it would move on to the next discussion on models anyway.
Very good, thank you. I don't seem to have slide control yet.
Yeah, one moment, I'll just get into that. And now you have them.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Rob said, we were making a single presentation for presenting both the philatelist and the PowerF, but then we noticed that we were split into two sessions. So one part of it's in this session and the other part is on Thursday. So let's see if we can. If I skip something somewhere, that's probably because why. So what I want to talk about in this session today is a little bit why we are moving philatelist and PowerF to the green working group. I want to emphasize this philatelist architecture and the core principles behind it. A little bit about the relation between these two drafts, philatelist and PowerF, and then there are some next steps at the end. So we think that both philatelist and PowerF belong in the green working group, despite they having been developed in other working groups in earlier IETF meetings. And basically it's because we feel that now that green is getting momentum and speed and finding some attendees, this is the right place. This is where the people are that are interested in these topics. And also, I think that even if there are some people, many of us here are also in these other forums, other working groups, but this working group has the right expectation about the timeline for how things should be developed. We are all quite concerned about getting things out fairly quickly, which is not necessarily the case. I mean, everybody wants to get things out quickly, but here we have a higher sense of urgency, I believe. So I would like both philatelist and PowerF to move here. Philatelist is the main topic of this architecture conversation that we're having today. And philatelist is built on a number of principles or architectural principles. Some of these are discussed in this AIB paper that's being developed for. Help me, Rob, what's the name of this paper?
I don't know.
All right. Anyway, we have a group that's trying to develop some architectural guidance for building sustainable internet applications. So in there, some of these core principles are fleshed out in a bit more. But to summarize some of that, one of the core principles for collecting telemetry data about network equipment when it comes to energy consumption and other green metrics that we care about, is that it needs to work with existing equipment. We can't define a new standard, and here it takes a few years and then get it slowly adopted into actual equipment that equipment developers are making. And then at some point, 10 years from now, operators are starting to bring that out into networks, because we don't have time to lose 10 years. So a fundamental idea behind this is that we need to work with whatever devices have today. We can't wait for devices to support new protocols or new standards, new metrics, and so on. We have to work with what's there. This means that we have to import data from all kinds of devices with all kinds of formats, and try to make sense out of that. And of course, that requires the framework to support adapting the data and aggregating data and transforming the data in various steps before we can't add apples and oranges. So we need to be able to transform the data before we store it or before draw conclusions from it. Which also brings me to the next point here. All the data that we collect needs to have a clear content declaration metadata, so we know what it is, where we got it from, how it has been transformed, what units it has, and so on. I have seen many graphs that are showing energy consumption from networks or particular applications in my days. But as soon as I ask, so what does this graph really show? Is the cooling included in this number? And so on. Nobody knows, because it's an opaque system and nobody knows what units it's been collecting data from. It's something that draws a nice graph and it looks impressive on the show floor, but what it really means is very difficult to know. So we need to have the metadata that are being collected together with the data, and we need to expect that somebody else is going to use this data for something, and they need to know what it represents. I also think another core principle here is that we need to design this collection framework or collection methodology together with the users of this data. We all know about GHGP, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and SBTI, the Science-Based Target Initiative. Those are the economists, I usually call them the economists, that are computing how much energy and CO2 emissions and so on are being generated by various corporations and various initiatives. And then they need to understand whatever we do, so that they can take advantage of whatever the numbers that we produce. If not, all our efforts are pretty pointless. And also the other way around, we may need to learn from them, understand how they produce their assessments, so that we provide the relevant sort of data. It easily happens otherwise that we are generating data in a format that they have difficult to consume. And also we have a lot of insights about this. We talked earlier today in Sustain RG about energy proportionality, for example. The economists are typically assuming that number of bits per joule or per gigawatt hour, kilowatt hour or something like that is a very useful metric. And some devices it may be, but for others it may not. And we need to tell them that. Another aspect that I think is a fundamental core principle here is that we need to make many small components. We can't have a monolithic standard deciding everything at once. We have to have many small modules that can understand how you read power data from a 10-year-old device using SNMP, another module that can transform data that are using volts and amperes and try to figure out how that makes a watt, depending on how things are computed. I also think this should be configurable so that it's easy to connect these collection points and aggregation points into so that it reflects however you are building your network, and not do that in code and assume a lot of things. And having this as a configuration also makes it much more transparent when it comes to what are we actually measuring, because you can read that not in code but in configuration, which is typically easier. And in this list framework, we're defining a number of different roles or pipeline stages, if you like, for the components in this collection framework. We have some components are doing collection, interfacing with devices and getting data from them. Some are doing aggregation, trying to summarize data from multiple sources. Some of them are doing processing, meaning transforming from one type of unit to another, or filling in gaps, or transforming between different timescales and other types of changes of the data. Some of these components are concerned with displaying the graphs, and some of them may be making decisions based on what you find. If the energy price is high, maybe you want to move some load from here to there, or change the traffic patterns, or shut things down, or make other decisions. So we have these components roles that we talk about in this.
Jan, Luis is in the queue. Do you want to take his question now?
Yeah, please, Luis.
More than a question, just a comment. We are precisely now working in a European project with this idea of building the same long-range graph. So based on metadata of the different metrics that we could collect in the network, not only in the let's say IETF technology domain, but also expanding to the other domains, mobile network and so on. So probably as long as we are advancing on that, maybe we will share with you, so that, I mean, that you can somehow check and validate the approach is somehow similar to this, and maybe we can interact offline on this. Thank you.
Absolutely, I think that would be really good. The larger scope we have, this better chance that the economists will care. So I think it's really good to adjust and grow the user base. Absolutely.
Mahesh, do you want to take?
So these are the.
Sorry,
okay, one more. Yeah, please, Mahesh. I didn't see that.
Mahesh speaking as a contributor again. And I will admit that I didn't read the entire document. I read the abstract and maybe through the introduction. And the first question I was asking myself is, how does this work relate to the Yang push and all the telemetry work that is going on in the NMOP working group?
I think that's excellent work going on there, and that's absolutely one of the formats that we can import data into this framework. It will be, but we cannot assume that all devices will support Yang push for quite a while.
Okay.
Yep, you're good to go. Thanks.
Okay. Yep, I'll move on from the core principles to the more concrete framework aspects. So as I mentioned, the philatelist framework, it defines a number of different roles. You have providers, you have collectors, aggregators, processors, displays, and decision-making components, and they all make up this sort of framework. And one of the principles for this framework is that all the connections, all the little thin lines between these boxes and yeah, between all these boxes is decided by configuration. And it's the data storage is then in time series databases generally. So it's you build up a network of collection points and aggregation parts by configuration by the system. So that's the idea behind the philatelist. So here we have this mix with something pertaining to philatelist and something to PowerF. So I will on the left side today, and we'll discuss the connection to the right side of this slide on Thursday. So what we have today, that's what we have to work with, what things are out in the network. We have devices with existing sensors, but where are they and how do we use them? And that's what you're doing by configuring the collectors. You tell them, go collect from here. It has units of this type. It has precision of this type. It pertains to this part of the network or the device or the system. And then you can group these sensors into something that we call dashboards. And so most of this interesting stuff, these dashboards then appear off box. They happen in the management system that is doing this. And also in some cases, maybe data will be provided from data sheets or other proxy systems, and then you can point to such data sources as well. So you would combine data sources of every kind into your collection, even from data sheets to live running Yang push. And if we compare this to other work going on in other working groups and other documents, for example, there's plenty of relevant stuff going on in the IVY, in the inventory working group. And so we have a, let's call it a bridging module, a Yang module that can connect the data in PowerF with the structure that is provided in IVY. So you can relate all these collection, the data that you get and the data it pertains to with the actual inventory data model. We have several documents in the Green Working Group being published here that are inventing things like energy saving mode and energy saving method and stuff like that. And of course, it's laudable that we are trying to see how we can save energy, because it doesn't matter how much we measure if we can't actually implement some changes based on that. But I think it's unfortunate to create too many new concepts, because all the devices out in the field today will not have these new energy saving mode. So we'll need to be able to energy save on devices that don't support this new concept. So I think energy saving modes and stuff like that should be in the management system. It's a management system concept that is then telling devices what to do and what not to do. We don't necessarily need the devices to know that they are part of an energy saving scheme. I think I'll move on to the next slide here. So if we ignore the left part of the slide today and look at the right side, I would propose that we are adopting the draft TLM philatelist, the draft PISLM PowerF, and draft KLL Yang label TSDB in green. And with that, I will open for any comments or questions.
So any questions, now's a good time to come up. So Jan, I think for me, the elephant in the room here is that the underlying framework document is, initially I think was much broader than just green metrics in terms of what you're doing. It's like a general way of aggregating information up together. That's my understanding how the framework works, which is somewhat similar to some of the work that's happening in MMOP in describing the Yang push sort of frameworks. How are you, so I've got two questions in my mind. One is whether we should try and adopt anything of that size or scope within this working group, or two is to understand how you envisage tuning that framework to be greener metrics specific or related or directed in that direction. I mean, what makes it's particularly related to energy metrics and energy control?
You are quite right that that philatelist in itself is not specific to the green goals and only to energy or something. You can measure anything using that framework. But I think the reason I want to bring it here is the timeline and the interested people. Here we can make it progress in the sort of speed that I'm interested in. And the other part of the question is, okay, how do we make this specific to energy and stuff? And that's the PowerF draft that builds on top of philatelist. We separated, we just cut, since we could see that there was some sort of general usability of the philatelist part of it, we separated that out into a separate draft. And then PowerF builds entirely on that. PowerF is not, in this form that we have it published now, it is completely unusable without philatelist.
Okay, so that I understand. So I see Mahesh is in the queue, so I'll let you comment. But I think it's one of these things where it may well be that Diego and I need to chat with Mahesh and see if there's any way this would be feasible, because at the moment I think we'd have to recharge to bring this into scope, and that would be tricky, I think. But Mahesh?
Yeah, so Rob, I think you kind of preempted one of the questions that I had. Now, I'll jump to the other points that I had. One is, from a process perspective, the 01 draft, I think, expired in November of 2024. So at the minimum, revitalize the draft. And I believe you should rename it with the green word somewhere so that it falls into the document list in the green working group. But aside from that, you mentioned terminology, and if you could go to the previous slide actually for a minute. You're talking about other drafts in the green working group. So my question was, the use case document touches on metrics, and I wonder how much of this is an overlap with the work on the terminology draft.
I don't think there's any overlap with the terminology. I mean, we need terminology to understand what we are talking about, and this document is not trying to do any terminology.
Okay, then I think I'll skip the next question because it's kind of related to that.
So is there any other questions in the queue? Short time. I think I can see how the PARIF one, that clearly falls into scope. And I also understand the urgency of wanting to get this whole work moving forward, I think. So that I think is important. But there are other frameworks for doing the statistics and other Yang models effectively for doing it. So I think it'd be good to understand whether we need a framework here in terms of doing this to achieve our goals in this working group and to achieve the wider goals of what we're trying to achieve here. If this is something that's necessary, or whether there's a solution that doesn't have this and it can be equally solved in other ways. So I think that would be good to understand.
Let me ask one question then. So is there other frameworks proposed that can do this for existing equipment?
I don't know. So I think in terms of, I was thinking just in terms of defining Yang models. So collecting the data, there's different ways you can do that, and you don't need any new technology to do that. I think the aspect of it in terms of what's new and different here is the idea of collecting this information from other devices that don't support this. So the aggregation of data from many devices, that side of things. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, we need to collect data from refrigerators, from redfish CPUs, and we need to collect it from routers. And it's a very wide array of things. And if you consider this whole thing, as much as I like Yang push, it's not going to cut it for a long time and maybe ever. We need to be flexible when it comes to what we consume.
And at the same time, I think we will need to be careful here in terms of making sure we don't try and solve too much too quickly. I think this is something we might need to phase where the initial focus of the working group was some very simple data models to get the data off, some very simple data models to control it. This work, by my understanding of it, is far broader in that, and it'll be a lot more review and work and things. So that if we use that as a base piece, it's going to slow us down. Whereas I don't think that rules us out saying, actually, we should consider this as solving the wider problem. But I think we want to decouple those two things. So I think it's definitely we need to chat with Mahesh some more and look at the draft in more details, and maybe chat with you and find out whether this is sort of in scope or out of scope now, whether it could become in scope, and how we would progress this if there's interest in the working group as well.
Yeah, but I think a modular architecture is a good thing. That doesn't mean that you have to develop every conceivable component.
Yeah, just a comment on this, Jan, is precisely that this is something that I don't have a complete view right now on which part of the combination of philatelist and PowerF can be. One is about the full integration of data, and the other one is about collecting data, about, using what we have started to call the common model. Probably my view is that the PowerF is more about this common model, about how individually you can collect information, while philatelist, since it has a much wider scope, would include this complete aggregation. I guess that I'm frankly quite interested on this, I mean, I'm now not speaking as a chair. I'm interested, personally interested, because that connects with other work that we are doing. But I agree with Rob that we have to shape this or to understand how we can shape this to fit into the current scope we have. That's something that we have to calibrate carefully.
You'll hear more about it on Thursday when I talk about PowerF.
Yeah. Let's PowerF is for Thursday, right? We're not going to spoil the. Okay. Marisol, you are in the queue.
Yes, as I have my Marisol Palmero Cisco, as I have my hand, I probably could bring it down as well, but I will not be able to be there on Thursday. And I just want to reiterate what Jan already covered. The biggest challenge working with customers on my daily job is about collection of what is available. And this framework gives the capability of the networking devices to say where they are. Right, I would like people to read the philatelist and this concept about the different levels, level 0 to level 5. But I wanted to reiterate as well that processing on how to consume the metrics is also something that requires energy. And moving to the AI, if you can give the capability of having more structured data, this is also saving energy on the inferring and the training of the data model. I think this kind of architecture could make a difference, right? Moving forward as well, providing these capabilities to structure data. And just that, it was just a comment.
Laurent Chavalia. I would like to come back to the comment that Rob made. I fully concur that the group is focused and should be careful about expanding the scope early on, but I see value in the proposal, and especially I like the approach about combining with the usage and having this kind of pipeline approach. So a bit my question is, would it be useful or is it harmful to consider this, to make this work welcome in the group, at least to continue the investigation? Maybe it will not be working group adopted, but at least to have a place to continue this discussion, kind of preparing the next phase. But because if the message or the signal is you're not welcome, then what happens to the work? No. I'm not saying that this is what you said, but just to clarify that maybe people see value in having a place to continue this discussion without getting in the way of the working group. That's a bit my statement.
Yes, just to, definitely not under any sort of impression that this work's not welcome. I just know that we've got to be careful, because if we work on this for 2 years and produce a framework, and even if it doesn't slow down the other work, and we give it to the IESG to publish, Mahesh or the IESG might turn around and say, we can't publish that because it's not in charge of the working group. So we just need to make sure that we get that and cross the T's, dot the I's before we do anything. And to your point, yes, it is possible that maybe we can work on common data models at the same time, and this sort of framework could be something that we do in parallel at a slightly slower pace. It doesn't have to slow things down. But I'd like the energy there, and if we think this is going to be useful and solve problems, then absolutely we should be considering it.
Sorry, I think I'm jumping into the queue, Mahesh. I think listening to all the presentations and the asks, one common theme for me seems to be is people are still struggling to figure out whether this is part of the charter or not part of the charter. And I think it would be helpful for maybe the three of us to sit down and kind of define what that boundary of what we are trying to get to as part of the charter. This thing about something attached to a network, is that part of in the scope or it's out of scope? So maybe that's the clarity that needs to be done before we decide whether the philatelist framework is something we want to adopt, or PowerF, or and the combination of PowerF or not.
Suresh Krishnan. So I think like Mahesh's point, right? I do think this work is in scope somehow. It may or may not be in the charter, right? Depending on your reading of it, right? But that's something you can handle like at some point down the line whether you want to adopt this draft or not. But like I think like Lona's point, like this is really the place to discuss it. It's got the people who want to do it. It's like most closely related to the other stuff being done in the group, because at some point, right, like once these are collected, like, you know, how do you actually aggregate it and do it? Because there's more to it, data, than just collecting it, right? I think that's kind of why I think it belongs here, right? It may or may not be ready for, like, you know, for a deliverable at this point, right? But I think that's something the chairs and AD can sit down and discuss and figure out like how to kind of do about this. But the set of people who want to work on it is here, because it is like not really sustain RG stuff because it's not that far out in the future, but there might be some work that's required, like to like get it like closer to something that's ready for engineering. So.
And I've closed the queue and we're out of time. So just to wrap up, I think that's a really good session today. I think it would be, I still encourage people to get more discussion on the list, more energy on the list, because I think it'll help the work group progress. We will try and do it better in terms of organizing interims. I think it was useful sort of feedback to try and choose a given time and arrange those. And then we'll sort of try and schedule topics. We've got a follow-up session for an hour on Thursday at the same time, 5 p.m. Don't know which room it's in, but we will be discussing the model side of it in that session. So thank you all.